In this nugget, we get to walk through the steps of downloading and using a virtual machine that has all of our troubleshooting tickets contained in it for the troubleshooting labs. Let's begin. One of the great things about these troubleshooting labs, my friend, is that they're all set up and ready to go, but the challenge is we can't run them unless we have the virtual machine. So our first step in getting that virtual machine running in our own environment so we can do the labs is to download the Nugget Lab files associated with this course. And as part of that download, there's going to be an OVA file. Now, this OVA is a virtual machine that can run in virtually any VMware environment. So with that OVA file downloaded and on your local computer, you could then launch it as part of VMware's Workstation, VMware Player. You could run it on ESXi, either on a standalone ESXi host or an ESXi host that is participating as part of vSphere. Or if you're on a Macintosh, you could use the VMware Fusion to launch this virtual machine. Now, one of the cool things about this virtual machine is that it has GNS3 all configured and ready to go, with one exception. It does not have Cisco's iOS images. So we'll also need to download from Cisco a couple of iOS images, one for a 3700 series and one for a 7200 series, because that's what's used inside of GNS3. And I'll show you exactly where you need to place those files. And then we'd want to create a real quick sample topology just to make sure that our idle PC is under control. As we proceed together in this nugget, we'll already presume that we have downloaded and unzipped the files and we currently have the OVA locally on our file system. And then with that OVA file in place, I'll walk you through right now how to set up your environment. So we're going to begin with VMware Workstation. Now, if you don't have a license for VMware Workstation, you can download an evaluation copy for, I think it's 30 days directly from VMware. And I think VMware is currently like at version 11. Currently, I'm using VMware 10. And if you have a slightly older version of VMware Workstation, that should work as well. So here in VMware Workstation, I'm going to go to File. I'm going to select Open from the drop-down menu. I'm going to go to the location that has the OVA file that I downloaded from the Nugget Lab area. And here it is, tshoot-vm314c.ova. It is about 4.5 gigabytes in size. It's pretty big. So I'll simply double-click on that to install that as a virtual machine here in VMware Workstation. And I'm also going to choose a location on my file system that has plenty of space to hold that VM. And once it's installed, be prepared for it to take about 10 gigs of space. So on my computer, on my Y drive, I've got plenty of space, and I made a folder called tshoot-demo. I'm going to select that, click on OK, and then when I click on Import, it's going to create a new virtual machine that'll show up as tshoot-demo. And all the files for that virtual machine will be stored under this tshoot-demo folder on my Y drive. So with those in place, we'll click Import. Now, while that's importing, let me show you another way that we could run this using the free VMware Player. And to do that, we would download and install VMware Player on our computer. Then we'd open up the file system. We'd go to that same OVA file. This is the one that we downloaded from the Nugget Lab area. Right-click on it and say Open With, and we could simply select VMware Player. Or you could go to VMware Player and open it that way. And that is yet another way to run this virtual machine. So in my case, because we're installing it as a virtual machine as part of VMware Workstation, I don't need a second instance of it running in VMware Player. So let's go back to VMware Workstation and continue with that. So back at VMware Workstation, here's our machine. It's called tshoot-demo, and we could just launch it right here. Or if you wanted to make it a little bit faster and you have the resources to do it, we could right-click on that virtual machine, go down to Settings from the drop-down menu, and we could go down to Processors, and we could allocate it additional CPUs. So if the computer that you're currently running on has multiple cores and you want to allocate more CPU for this virtual machine, this is how you could do it. So I'm going to go ahead and allocate it 2 cores and click on OK. So now it's at 2 gigs of memory, 2 processors. It's got a 20 gig hard drive, but it's not really using all of that. It's thin provisioned in VMware Workstation. It'll only use physically as much disk as it needs, up to 20 gigs. It's also set to automatically bridge the network interface card on this virtual machine to your network interface card on your computer, which means that this virtual machine should have access to the same network that the host computer running VMware Workstation has access to. And then we'll go ahead and launch it. We could click on the green arrow here, or we could right-click on the virtual machine and go to Power and say Start with the guest. Either way is great. And then I'm going to bring this full screen by clicking on this icon here to bring this virtual machine full screen. And it's asking us to log in. Now, the top secret password for most of my nuggets, by the way, is this. It is nugget !23. And that also happens to be the password for this user called CBT Nuggets. So we'll supply that password of nugget exclamation mark 23 with a capital N at the beginning and click login. Now I have this set up with a little CPU monitor over here on the right that automatically starts up by default. And I got a little help in setting that up from my good friend Sean Powers. So if you're ever interested in learning a lot more about Linux, Sean Powers is the guy. And I'd like to publicly thank Sean for his help in not only directing me to this resource tool, which is awesome, but also telling me about Xubuntu and how easy it is to use. And that's why I chose Xubuntu as the operating system for this virtual machine. So up here on the right, you might notice that your CPU utilization may be somewhere between 0 and 10%. Now these labs are based on GNS3, and although the GNS3 is all configured, we don't yet have the iOS images on this virtual machine. So what we need to do is get them. And to do that, we're going to go up here to the top left-hand corner and open up a web browser. And because this virtual machine is bridged to the network interface card on the host computer running VMware Workstation, we should have access to the same resources, including the internet, that the host computer does. Next, we'd log on to cisco.com with our CCO account, and we would go to this location, Downloads, which you can start by going to Support, then Downloads, and then Products, Routers, Service Provider Edge Router, 7200 series routers, 7206 VXR router, and Software on Chassis. And the image that we're going to be using as part of our GNS3 labs is this guy right there. So you'd want to download that to your virtual machine and have it ready. And in many cases, your CCO account is linked to a service contract, which would then give you the ability to download that software. So this is one of the 2 images that we're going to need. So if you haven't already yet, you may want to pause this and just jot down the exact name of that image, because that's the one that GNS3 in the labs is expecting to be there, but you need to provide. The other image, if we go up to Routers, and this time go to Branch Routers, and we select the 3700 series from the list over on the right, and we select the 3725, and then go to Software on Chassis, and then click iOS Software. This is the link to the downloads area that we'd go to on cisco.com. And the image we're going to use for the 3725 is this guy right here. And the reason we're using that image is because it supports the switch port module that we want to integrate some level of switching inside of our Truffle ticket environment. And once again, I would encourage you to pause the screen and jot down the exact name of this iOS image, because that's going to be the second of the 2 iOS images that you're going to want to have downloaded from Cisco's site and placed on the local virtual machine. Now, in addition to cisco.com, your company may already have a repository of various iOS images that you can pull from, so you may want to look there as well. Because if your company has it locally, that would save you the time from downloading it from cisco.com. It's also potentially possible that a person might obtain these from the internet. And we all know that anytime you're searching on the internet, you'd want to have some good safeguards in place on your computer, for example, virus checking and all the rest, so that as a person searches around, the machine doesn't get damaged. So if we were going to search for iOS software, we want to be very careful about doing that. Now, the reason I can't provide these images is because they're not mine. These are licensed by Cisco. So if an individual decided they were going to go out and search for the images, again, having good precautions in place on their computer would be a great idea. And an example of searching for images might go something like this. I'll click on this link called Search for T-Shoot Images. It takes me out to a zip file. It's under 100 megabytes. I could download that. And when downloading any file from anywhere on the internet, we'd always want to make sure we have our virus scanning in place. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to save this file. It's now downloaded to my downloads folder. Now the second piece that we need to deal with is we need to put the iOS images in the correct place. And they also have to be named specifically. So for example, if we launch GNS3, which is already pre-installed on this virtual machine, and we go to Edit within GNS3 and go to Preferences from the drop-down menu under Edit, under Dynamip's iOS routers, it has currently identified 2 iOS images, a 7200 and a 3700. And here's the specific image name that it's expecting to find. It's expecting to see an image called C7200, lowercase c, -adv-15.image. And for the second one, which is the 3725, it's expecting to see an image called 3725-adv-12.image. And that's an uppercase C for that C before the 3725. So what we'd want to do is we'd want to get those files from cisco.com and then rename them respectively to these 2 file names and then place them in the images folder for GNS3. So I'm going to close GNS3 just for a moment. I'm going to go to my file system here on this virtual machine. The username is cbtnuggets, so I'll go to Downloads. And here in Downloads, I have that .zip file that I just downloaded. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on that .zip file, and I'm going to say, please extract to. And I'm going to extract these to the iOS images subfolder under GNS3. which is where GNS3 is expecting those files to be. So I'm going to click on Extract to. I'll go to GNS3. I'll go under Images, iOS. So here's the path right here of where we're going to place these. And I'm simply going to click on this button called Extract in the bottom right-hand corner. And it says here the Application Archive Manager is closed unexpectedly. I'm going to go ahead and say Leave Closed. Let me go back to that folder, and let's see whether or not those images are there. We'll go to GNS3, Images, iOS. So here's the path to those images. And again, if you download those from Cisco.com, you'd want to rename those long image names to these exact image names for these two platforms, because these are the two exact names for those images that GNS3 is expecting to find. So we have three things going for us. Number one, we have the right images. Number two, they are named correctly. And three, they are in the right location, the iOS subfolder under Images, which is under GNS3. Now, because this could be deployed in multiple places, for example, with Player, on VMware Workstation, on an ESXi host, or in Fusion, I want to make sure one more thing is in place for all of us as well, and that is I want to make sure the idle PC is set correctly for your virtual machine with GNS3. And to test that, we're going to launch GNS3 by double-clicking on it, and we are going to create a new topology. I'm going to click on this icon here, which is Browse All Devices. Let's drag out a 7200 series, and we'll also drag out an EtherSwitch router. And we could connect them together and use all the cool tools that GNS3 has for us. But my purpose here is just to verify that with both of these devices running, that the CPU is not going crazy on this virtual machine. That's why we have this monitor sitting over here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to click on Play. And then once these devices are now running, I'm going to click on this icon right here, which will open up a CLI console access to each of these devices. And I have it set up to automatically go to various tabs. So I've got R1 here on the left and ESW1 on the right. I'm going to press Enter a couple times just to make sure that they're both responding. So I'd like you to notice something. While these devices were booting, they took up a boatload of CPU utilization. But now that they're both running and we have consoles to them and we've pressed Enter, which is really important, so that the device, for example the router, is not just waiting for input, that can also spike CPU. But notice now that the average CPU is around 1% on both of the cores in this virtual machine. And if that's the case in your virtual machine, we have two devices running, you have console access to both, and your CPU is under 10%. And it might vary a little bit based on how many cores you gave it, whether you're running on VMware Workstation or VMware Fusion. But if you have two devices up and running and you're averaging about 10% or less, you are in good shape. And what I would like to avoid for everyone is a situation where you're pegged at 100% and it's totally unworkable because it's pegged. And if you are sitting at 100% and it's steady and it's not going down, I would have you do two things. Number one, very important, open up consoles to each of those devices and press Enter a couple of times. That gets tons and tons of people in trouble because they haven't opened up consoles to those devices and those devices are waiting for that Enter to be pressed. So console plus press Enter for each of these devices. Secondly, if that still is a very, very high sustained CPU, we're talking like 100%, the second thing I'd have you do is mess with the idle PC. And the idle PC goes like this. You'd right click on a device. From the drop down, you select idle PC. This will send CPU to 100% if it isn't already. So in here, it has one offering with an asterisk next to it. It might have two or three, and all we need to do is choose one that has an asterisk. Click on OK. That will apply that idle PC, and hopefully our CPU utilization will go back down. It won't be pegged at like 80 or 90 or 100%. So my friend, in this nugget, we've taken a look at downloading and then implementing the virtual machine that we're using for the troubleshooting tickets. We also identified where we could go to download from Cisco the iOS images, as well as renaming those and putting them in the right location on the virtual machine, and then do a quick check just to verify that with two devices running, that they weren't consuming 100% of the CPU pegged and not going down. And if they were, we also addressed how to correct that. And now, with this infrastructure in place, you and I can now go into troubleshooting pre-configured and ready to go GNS3 configurations that I've put together for you as you practice your skills and get better and better at doing troubleshooting. Our action items for this nugget are simple. Download the Nugget Lab files, get the OVA deployed as a virtual machine. I demoed VMware Workstation, but you can also use Player, ESX, vSphere, or Fusion. Get the images for the routers, place them appropriately, verify your CPU usage, and once that's in place, we can now focus on the network topology and the individual troubleshooting tickets. I appreciate you joining me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.